There are no two ways about it. 2020 is shaping up to be one of the best years ever for video games. From Cyberpunk 2077 to Halo Infinite and The Last of Us Part 2, these are likely to be some of the best games of the last decade and maybe even of all time. But if you're curious about all the games coming out, from the heavy hitters to the games that might get overshadowed, I'm taking a look at 35 of the year's most hyped and most interesting releases. We've got a lot to cover, so buckle up. And by the way, I'll be previewing a lot of these games on my channel, so if you like my content, hit the subscribe button to see all my videos right when they launch. But for now, let's get into it. 2020 kicks off with Tokyo Mirage Sessions' Sharp FE Encore, a port of a game that was originally released to great reviews on the Wii U back in 2016. This is a JRPG with a capital J that somehow combines the colorful storytelling and urban setting of the Shin Megami Tensei games with certain characters and strategic elements of Fire Emblem. You'll explore dungeons, solve puzzles, and discover Tokyo, but the real hook here lies in the turn-based combat, which has you experimenting with special attacks, learning how to exploit enemy weaknesses, upgrading your skills, customizing your equipment, and more. If you've got a Switch, you dig the over-the-top aesthetic, and you like Fire Emblem, check out Tokyo Mirage Sessions on January 17th. If you dig RPGs, but maybe you don't have a Switch, or your anime loyalties lie instead with Dragon Ball Z, you'll want to check out Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. It's a full-blown action RPG, but longtime fans of the Dragon Ball Z fighting games should be happy to hear that the battles take place in real time, and, at least from what I've heard, borrow elements from those games. But Kakarot is obviously way more than just combat. The story will focus on Goku and explore the backstories of other characters as well. You'll also get to fly around different areas, seek out quests, and partake in a bevy of side activities like, of course, fishing. Dragon Ball Z fans craving a new adventure can pick up Kakarot on January 17th for PS4, Xbox One, and PC. Journey to the Savage Planet is an indie game developed by a small group of ex-AAA developers where your job is to explore an alien world, research its inhabitants, and determine whether it's suitable for human settlement. But you soon discover a giant alien structure and your mission becomes to investigate and unravel its mysteries. While you do wield a pistol, it's the only gun you'll have in the entire game, and the developers insist that this is not a shooter, but more of an exploration-focused adventure. Personally, I see hints of Subnautica, but on land, and the devs have mentioned that this game is much more linear. You'll be able to complete it in 10 to 12 hours, and as such, the game will not carry a premium price tag. Also, the website mentions co-op, but it's not clear how multiplayer might work. In any case, Journey to the Savage Planet launches on January 28th for PC, Xbox, and PS4. Ori and the Blind Forest is one of the best platforming games of the generation, and when its sequel, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, releases on February 11th, you can expect the same acrobatic controls, rewarding progression, and emotional storytelling. The developers are also promising new combat and exploration mechanics, such as this nifty burrowing maneuver. Plus, there'll be a new system for upgrading your abilities. There's also a new mode called Spirit Trials that lets you speedrun parts of the game and compete against other players. If you do play Ori, and you should, just don't expect a cakewalk. The original was very challenging, and judging by the bosses we've seen so far, that's not going to change. But trust me when I say this game will be worth your effort. VR normally isn't my thing, but nearly everyone who's played Iron Man VR says that it nails the experience of flying around in Iron Man's iconic armor. From what I can gather, the game is made up of contained levels that have you fighting bad guys and completing objectives as you fly around in full 360 degrees. You point your arms down to accelerate, move your wrists to steer, then extend your arms in front of you to brake or fire your blasters. We don't exactly know how big the game will be, but the devs have said it'll be long for a VR game, but shorter than a traditional game. In any case, if you've got a PSVR unit, this is one to keep an eye on. On March 3rd of 2020, more than 2 decades after Final Fantasy VII launched on the PlayStation, Part 1 of the long-awaited remake arrives at last. The story is surprisingly timely as it follows a group of environmental freedom fighters through the gritty industrial metropolis of Midgar. While this segment took less than 10 hours in the original game, the remake promises to last up to 30, so you can definitely expect a more fleshed out story. Not only that, we're also getting an entirely new combat system that replaces the slow, turn-based encounters of the original with real-time, action-heavy battles that somehow maintain the same party-based experience. And having played the demo at E3, I can say that it's packed with nostalgia and that the combat in this game is going to be absolutely epic. At first glance, Doom Eternal might look like more of the same, but if you watched my Ultimate preview, you know that id Software is doing a lot to separate this game from Doom 2016. There are new and smarter enemies, revamped weapons, and most notably, entirely new movement mechanics. You'll now be able to climb, dash, and perform a handy monkey bar swing. Plus, your shotgun now has a razor-sharp grappling hook for latching on to enemies. We also know this game will take players to heaven, which should make this unlike any Doom game before. Lastly, it is adding a totally new 2v1 multiplayer mode where 2 demons take on the Doomslayer. Doom Eternal is coming to PS4, Xbox One, PC, and Stadia on March 20th, followed by the Switch sometime later. Animal Crossing New Horizons is sure to be one of the best-selling Switch games of 2020, and with 7 years having passed since the release of New Leaf, there are plenty of new features to look forward to. Of course, there's the new island setting, but there's also the improved crafting system that expands on Pocket Camp, letting you craft items and materials that you find and harvest in the world. Next is your new smartphone that helps you manage your day, and that features a new reward system called Nook Miles. The more activities you do, the more miles you earn, and the more stuff you unlock. There are also new character customization options, not to mention new decoration options like pathways and outdoor furniture. You can play New Horizons for Switch on March 20th. Easily the most anticipated game of 2020, Cyberpunk 2077 is a first-person RPG that takes place in a future where body modification has become the norm. As if the sky-high production values and lifelike environments weren't enough to set Cyberpunk apart, I'm actually most excited about its unique character progression model. Foregoing traditional class-based systems, it has what's called a fluid class system. In other words, you don't choose who you want to be at the outset, but instead you decide as you play. Tackle challenges with brute force, and you might develop into a melee fighting machine. Take the stealthy approach, and you might become a netrunner, capable of hacking your way through the entire game. You can even hack an enemy's body augments, forcing them to, for example, pull the pin on their own grenade, or blow their own head off. But that's just a small part of the living, breathing world of Night City. Cyberpunk will no doubt demand your attention, and it'll reward you with dozens, if not hundreds, of hours of gameplay. Coming just 8 days after the biggest RPG of this generation comes the remake of another RPG from a totally different generation. Trials of Mana was originally released in Japan back in 1995, and while the original 2D version is available on the recently released Collection of Mana, the remake will deliver a much more modern experience. If you're unfamiliar, this is a party-based action RPG set in a colorful fantasy world that features a rich story and fast-paced real-time combat. Unfortunately, the remake won't have a multiplayer option like the original, but it will feature completely 3D graphics and environments, plus it promises a revamped battle system, an updated soundtrack, and it's adding voice acting. If there's one major 2020 release that's the most difficult for me to judge, it's Marvel's The Avengers. It's a persistent game as a service, but I think to the delight of many gamers, it features a campaign that can be played entirely solo. You'll take control of Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, Thor, Black Widow, and the recently revealed Ms. Marvel. The game also features co-op side missions that, while optional, will help you earn everything in the game. I have to admit, the action does look really good, and with each Avenger providing a different gameplay style, not to mention the fact that Crystal Dynamics will be adding more Avengers down the road, I see a lot of potential here. But again, it's hard to gauge what to expect. How will the different playstyles work together? What will the live service elements be like for players who just want to play solo and offline? If you want to know the answers to these questions, look for a preview on my channel before the May 15th release. Taking place 5 years after Ellie and Joel's first adventure, The Last of Us Part 2 tells a violent story of revenge that looks to challenge one's notion of what's right, what's wrong, and what's technically possible in a video game. We know we'll get to explore the unforgiving wilderness of Wyoming and the lush ruins of Seattle, and we know the game will feature new enemies and updated AI, as well as more realistic movement, combat, and stealth mechanics. One new mechanic that illustrates how the game will challenge your morality are the dogs, which will sniff you out and give away your location. But be warned, killing them is a realistic and gut-wrenching affair. The rest of the moment-to-moment action is shaping up to be the most fluid and lifelike in any video game to date, and while the bleak and unapologetic world might not be for everyone, I expect The Last of Us Part 2 to be nothing short of an instant classic. Originally set for a February 20th release, it now launches on May 29th. And that's it for all the games that have specific release dates. Let's now look at all the games that have more vague release windows. Unlike 2019, 2020 looks to be relatively light in terms of deeply challenging experiences that draw from games like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro. But there's one game to look out for, and that's Nioh 2, a follow-up to one of the best Souls-like games not made by From Software. All impressions so far seem to indicate that Nioh 2 will be just as difficult as its predecessor, if not more so. Plus, it will now feature online co-op, new character customization options, and the ability to harness supernatural yokai powers that will transform your hero into a powerful, otherworldly being. Fair warning, this is only for gamers who like frustration and pain mixed with their fun and pleasure. With Dying Light 2, the parkour-focused exploration of the original is back with over double the acrobatic techniques, but it's the way the world unfolds thanks to its branching storyline that looks really interesting. In the E3 2019 gameplay demo, your mission was to provide drinking water to your people. One way to do this was to activate a particular water pump, but this was just one way to complete your objective. As we saw, turning on the pump broke a dam, which revealed not just a new story path, but an entirely new section of the map that wouldn't have been available had you made the opposite decision. The day-night cycle of the original also makes a return and will get new ways to fight the undead. If Dying Light 2 lives up to the beauty and the promise of the demo, it could be something special when it releases this spring. Minecraft is one of the most popular games in the world, so when developer Mojang announced their first standalone game to be developed completely in-house since Minecraft, it was a big deal. Minecraft Dungeons is a randomly generated dungeon crawler that you can play solo or cooperatively with friends. It has a mix of ranged and melee combat with loot such as items and weapons that you can find throughout the world. So it's Minecraft meets Diablo. That's what it looks like anyway, and if Mojang can nail the same addictive gameplay loop and replayability of Diablo, this could be a game we'll be hearing about for a very long time. Halo Infinite was revealed over a year ago, yet most of the game remains a mystery, but here's what we know. It's set to be a launch title for the Xbox Scarlett at the end of 2020, but it's also expected to run on the Xbox One, Xbox One X, and PC. Next, we know the game will feature a campaign that focuses on Master Chief rather than a fragmented campaign like we saw in Halo 5. While the game does take place after Halo 5, the team is calling it a quote, spiritual reboot designed for both longtime fans and new players alike. Lastly, it's being developed on a new engine called Slipspace, and it should look spectacular. Every other rumor about Halo Infinite is just that, a rumor, but we shouldn't have to wait long to learn more. If you're an 80s child like me, it's hard not to love the idea behind Predator Hunting Grounds, which is basically Predator the movie, the game. It's an asynchronous multiplayer shooter, and here's how it's described on its website by the game's official description. You quote, play as a member of an elite fire team and complete paramilitary operations before the Predator finds you. Or play as the Predator to hunt the most worthy prey, choosing from your vast array of deadly alien tech to collect your trophies one by one, end quote. So, you either do a bunch of military stuff before the Predator finds you, or you stalk soldiers from the treetops. I haven't played it, but those who have seem to genuinely enjoy the experience whether they play as a human or as the Predator. Disintegration is a tactical, first-person shooter, but instead of running around on foot by yourself, you're riding a hover bike, or what the game calls a grav bike, and you're in constant command of several AI squad mates. The idea of controlling the protagonist from high above while commanding your squad down below, just like in a top-down real-time strategy game, is pretty interesting, and the game is being created in part by one of the original creators of Halo, so there's that. Disintegration will feature a single-player campaign and what looks like a pretty in-depth 5v5 multiplayer mode. Initial impressions sound incredibly positive, and it should arrive before the end of 2020. In Twin Mirror, the new narrative-driven adventure from the creators of Life is Strange, you play Sam, an investigative journalist who wakes up in his hotel room with a bloody shirt and no memory of how he got there. It's then up to you to figure out what happened, and as you investigate, you uncover far deeper mysteries of the small-town setting. Gameplay-wise, you explore crime scenes to uncover clues, then enter what the game calls your Mind Palace, a realm within your consciousness where you piece together the truth. In other words, it's a detective game with a surreal slant and a Salvador Dali aesthetic. If you like story-based psychological adventure games, look for Twin Mirror sometime in 2020. I've admittedly never played a Tales game, but I like action RPGs, and after watching the beautiful trailer for Tales of Arise, I've never been more tempted to give the series a shot. Seriously, this game looks gorgeous, and brand director for the game, Yusuke Tomizawa, has even said that it's the new, more detailed visual style of the game that most sets it apart from previous games in the series. And if the graphics are the biggest departure from prior games, it's a safe bet that the gameplay won't be changing much. That said, the battle system will receive some updates, and Tomizawa also mentioned that this will be a great entry point for people who've never played a Tales game before. So if you're as curious as I am, and you're looking for a quality and lengthy action RPG, Tales of Arise could have your name on it. Psychonauts 2 is Tim Schafer's follow-up to his supernatural 3D platforming cult classic, which released all the way back in 2005. The original had you exploring an overworld as a teenage psychic agent in training, but the individual stages all took place inside the human mind, which allowed for some truly bizarre and surreal level design. As for Part 2, expect modernized platforming and camera controls, as well as obviously updated visuals, but some things won't change. We'll no doubt get the same Tim Schafer brand of humor and similarly trippy levels. If you just like to explore, jump around, and collect stuff, Psychonauts 2 should be a winner. Yakuza Like a Dragon, also known as Yakuza 7, marks a major change for the Yakuza series. While previous games featured a fast-paced beat-em-up style of combat, Like a Dragon features turn-based battles. A surprise? Yes, but it's cool how the game works this change into the story. See, the main character is a huge fan of JRPGs like Dragon Quest, so the combat is simply a reflection of his interests. As for the rest of the game, it tells a tale of revenge and features a city that's 3 times the size of previous Yakuza games. Plus, expect a ton of the same quirkiness that Yakuza is known for. For example, one of the world's minigames is a kart racer. Like a Dragon releases in Japan this January and sometime later in the year everywhere else. Like Cyberpunk 2077, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 is a first-person RPG based on a tabletop role-playing game. But rather than a future metropolis, you get to explore the underbelly of present-day Seattle. Gameplay-wise, you take the role of a vampire, and it sounds like which clans you associate with and other in-game choices will impact your character development. Expect both melee and ranged combat to play a big role in the game, and as for your abilities, they'll include telekinesis, the ability to transform into a mist, which might be good for stealth, and you can even become a swarm of bats. Bloodlines 2 was originally slated for spring 2020, but has now been delayed until sometime later in the year. Of perhaps any game on this list, I'm most skeptical about No More Heroes 3. Developer Grasshopper Manufacture and No More Heroes mastermind, Suda51, haven't quite lived up to the reputation they established with the first 2 games in the series. Plus, we know virtually nothing about Part 3 other than it's in development. As for the prequels, they were over-the-top hack-and-slash games that featured rewarding action, epic boss fights, a buffet of quirky and retro-styled minigames, and an irreverent sense of humor that you rarely see in video games. If that sounds like your kind of fun, you might want to keep a cautious eye on No More Heroes 3. Okay, that's the last of the games that have been confirmed for 2020. Let's now look at all the unconfirmed releases that are rumored to release sometime during the year, but could still be a ways off. Ghost of Tsushima is an open-world action stealth adventure where you play a samurai fighting off Mongolian invaders in 13th century Japan. And if the visuals and premise don't pique your interest, know that this comes from Sucker Punch, the incredibly talented developers behind the infamous games. As for the action, it looks like you'll get in plenty of brutal sword fights with your trusty katana, and as for the stealth, you've got a handy grappling hook that helps you sneak onto rooftops to scope out your victims. You'll also get to explore the countryside on horseback. Ghost of Tsushima is definitely releasing for the PS4, but it could also release for the PS5. And given that Sony probably wants a big tentpole release for the last half of the year, I'd be surprised if this slips past 2020. Then again, Sony won't release what is effectively the PS4's swan song until it's good and ready. Next up are 3 Ubisoft games that were scheduled to launch in 2020, but have each been delayed until sometime before March 31st, 2021. So 2020 is still a possibility. Also, each of the following 3 games are among the first to officially be confirmed for both current-gen consoles as well as PS5 and Xbox Scarlett. Let's take a look. Arguably the biggest game that Ubisoft delayed is Watch Dogs Legion, which is somewhat of a reboot for the Watch Dogs franchise. Previous games were traditional open-world affairs, but in Legion, which takes you to London, you no longer play as just one protagonist. Instead, you can recruit any NPC to become a playable member of your legion of freedom fighters. Seriously, you can recruit an old lady in the park, a businessman on his way to work, or even an enemy that tried to kill you. Literally anyone can become a playable character. What's more, each recruit has a unique background and skill set that can help complete particular objectives. For example, recruit someone who works in IT and they might be better for hacking missions. Pretty ambitious, but also pretty cool. Next on Ubisoft's list of delays is Gods and Monsters. Built by the team that developed Assassin's Creed Odyssey, this is an open-world action-adventure with RPG mechanics. But unlike AC Odyssey, it's obviously more cartoony and based in Greek fantasy than Greek history. We know the gameplay will be split between completing quests, fighting monsters, solving physics-based puzzles, and exploring a world made up of 6 distinct biomes. Plus, you'll find gates to the underworld that lead to challenge dungeons. If you're thinking that this looks and sounds a lot like Breath of the Wild, you'd be right, especially given that your bird companion will also help you glide across the game's expansive landscapes. The third Ubisoft game to get delayed was Rainbow Six Quarantine, a squad-based tactical shooter for up to 3 players at a time. From what we heard at E3, it sounds like Quarantine will be focused on PvE co-op gameplay, so I'm expecting a campaign-based experience as opposed to something competitive like Rainbow Six Siege. That said, it does sound like Quarantine will still draw from Siege in terms of the gadgets and tactics you can use. But perhaps most intriguing is that, judging by the game's name and trailer, it looks like you'll be battling some sort of infection or epidemic. Will we be fighting zombies or aliens in a Rainbow Six game? I'm guessing we'll find out at this year's E3. Atomic Heart has been on my radar for almost a year now, but it's been getting surprisingly little attention given how interesting it looks. It's a first-person RPG that takes place in an alternate history where the Soviet Union reigns supreme and where a technological revolution has led to a world populated by some seriously freaky robots. Gameplay-wise, Atomic Heart was initially pitched as an open-world game, but rumor has it that it's been pared down due to some development setbacks. As for combat, it's definitely a first-person shooter, but you'll also be doing a lot of melee combat and crafting, as every weapon in the game is basically homemade. The development rumors aren't encouraging, but it's hard to ignore the quality of the trailers we've seen so far. Originally planned by Team Cherry as an expansion to Hollow Knight, Silksong eventually outgrew their initial ambitions, so they decided to make it a full-on sequel. The first change that players will notice is that rather than descend into a subterranean world like in Hollow Knight, Silksong has you climbing to the top of a haunted kingdom. Other new stuff includes a new lead character named Hornet, over 150 new enemies, new attacks and abilities, new weapons, new music, and new characters. And fair warning, this game will be very difficult. If you lack patience, it's a tough sell, but if you crave a 2D Metroidvania with incredibly demanding combat, this is a likely Game of the Year contender. Also worth noting is that Silksong is set to release on PC and Switch, with no release yet announced for Xbox or PlayStation. The much-anticipated collaboration between Dark Souls director Hidetaka Miyazaki and Game of Thrones mastermind George R.R. Martin, Elden Ring is rumored to release in 2020. Having been in development since 2017, that is possible, but given how recently it was revealed and how little we've seen, my money's on 2021. Whenever it comes out, we know Elden Ring will be an open-world experience, which is a departure from Miyazaki. But the game will feature ruins and castles similar to those seen in Dark Souls. We also know that you'll be able to traverse the world on horseback and that big scary bosses will destroy you over and over again. If you've followed Xbox over the past several years, you probably know of Tunic. It's an indie game developed by just one guy who says the game is all about 3 things. exploring the countryside, fighting monsters, and finding secrets. Judging by how the main character hacks through enemies, grass, and pots, how he cracks open chests, and how he wanders across the overworld littered with caves and temples, it's hard not to think of old-school Zelda games after watching some of the gameplay. If the finished game can match the charm and polish of the trailers, this could be a great addition to the Xbox library. No release date has been set, but it was first shown all the way back in 2017, so I'd be surprised if we don't see it by the end of 2020. Bayonetta 3 is a bit of a weird case. It was revealed all the way back at the 2017 Game Awards, and since then, Platinum Games has released Astral Chain, an entirely separate Switch exclusive, which was awesome by the way, all without uttering a single peep about when to expect Bayonetta's next adventure. All we have gotten is one mention in a Nintendo Direct that yes, this game is still in development. Whenever Bayonetta 3 does arrive, it's safe to assume we'll get more over-the-top combo-driven action and wonderfully stupid dialogue, plus enormously spectacular bosses and set pieces. Currently in early access on Steam, Pray for the Gods was a game I got to see at PAX West, and it looks incredible. It's obviously inspired by Shadow of the Colossus, and while you will face off against skyscraper-sized monsters, there's way more to it than that. You'll solve environmental puzzles, scavenge for resources, and traverse the world using mechanics that might remind you of Breath of the Wild. But what I found most striking after playing Pray for the Gods is that the small development team have somehow managed to capture the same epic feel of the battles in Shadow of the Colossus. We don't know when Pray for the Gods will leave early access, but we do know that PS4 and Xbox One ports are underway. Unexpectedly revealed at E3 2019, Breath of the Wild 2 is official. And while a 2020 release might seem unlikely, here's why I think it could actually happen. With the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Scarlett set to release at the end of the year, Nintendo is going to need something to stay relevant. I don't see Metroid Prime coming until at least 2021, so unless they plan on releasing a Switch Pro or they've got Mario Odyssey 2 up their sleeve, Breath of the Wild 2 is the only thing I can think of that will keep Nintendo on people's mind amidst what could be one of the busiest holiday seasons in the history of video games. But even if Breath of the Wild 2 comes after 2020, Nintendo has said the game will be darker, and some fans have speculated that you might be able to play as not just Link, but also as Princess Zelda. So there you have it, 35 games that I think each deserve your attention, and that doesn't even include the launch games that will inevitably get announced for the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Scarlett. Thank you so much for watching this entire video. If you enjoyed it, give me a thumbs up and check out some of my other preview coverage on my channel. If you want to see what I'm playing or just keep up with me in general, follow me on Twitter and Instagram. And finally, I want to remind everyone to never stop questing.